Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Commission slot of Children, Education and Communities, the date being the 20th of February. I'll ask council officers when they start introducing their reports to introduce themselves first of all. Other members of the committee are sitting around the table, and we're joined by the executive member for Children Education, Councillor Andrew Waller. Right, I'll begin by declarations of interest. Anyone have any declarations of interest to make? Okay. Next, minutes of the 20th December 2022 meeting. Any comments to make around the members present? In that case, I'll sign them at a later date. We have no public participation today, which means we can pass on to the outcomes. Oh, yes, sorry. We have apologies from Councillor Hollier, who wasn't able to make it this evening. I'll move on to the outcomes of the local area SEND inspection revisit. Maxine, do you want to introduce this one and
thank
give
you.
us the highlights of the report? Thank you.
I am assuming that everybody has read the report. Just to say that we were revisited by Ofsted in November 2022, following receiving a written statement of action in November 2019. The purpose of the revisit was to check our progress against the 4 areas of significant weakness identified in 2019, which were leadership and governance, joint commissioning, co-production, and the quality of education, health and care assessment and planning. Following our revisit, Ofsted and CQC felt that we had made sufficient progress in all 4 areas of the written statement of action, which was a really important judgment for us to get. It's also important to stress that this is the start of our improvement journey, the next phase of our improvement journey, rather than that we've crossed a bar and that's it. This was also the last revisit under the previous SEND inspection framework, and a new SEND inspection framework has now been introduced, and we will be subject to that new framework on a future re-inspection. What's different about that new framework is it more closely mirrors the social care ILACS framework. So it has the same elements of full inspection with regular engagement events taking place over the period of time between full re-inspections. So we would expect that there would, for example, be focused inspection visits before we're actually fully re-inspected. There'll also be an annual engagement meeting with Ofsted and CQC, which will check on the continuation of our progress from the Ofsted revisit. We've got lots of work to do now, which is already underway. So one of the things that Ofsted tasked us with is ensuring that we've developed the SEND operational plan to sit underneath our SEND strategy. That work starts tomorrow in that we have, over the next 2 weeks, a series of workshops which are involving a wide range of stakeholders. And I'm really pleased to report that there's very, very strong involvement from parents in each of those workshops. So that will be crucial, really, both to the review of the SEND strategy, which was developed during COVID, and we did commit to doing an annual review of that SEND strategy, and also then to developing the operational actions which will sit underneath it and will continue to drive our progress in our implementation of the SEN reforms. The other thing that will happen in the next few weeks is that the government will publish their Green Paper implementation plan. Yeah, I am being told that it will be in the next few weeks. I was on a call with the DfE earlier and they're saying it's imminent, that it will be published. That's another important milestone in our improvement work, because obviously one of the things that we will want to do is ensure that we are also building in the messages from the implementation plan into our operational planning as a local area. So, but we're not losing time on waiting for that. What we've already done is fully brief schools forum on the outcomes of the SEND inspection, and they have formed task and finish groups, which will be bringing forward recommendations in two areas. One, to look at our current SEM banding, and the other area that they're focused on is alternative provision, both quality and sufficiency of alternative provision in the local area. They will report back to Schools Forum in May with recommendations about how we can actually take things forward in both those areas. We're also as well doing some work around what should ordinarily be available in mainstream, because that's an important part of the SEND structure in the local area. It's a while since we actually published our expectations around what should be ordinarily available in mainstream schools and settings. And it's an appropriate time to, again, do a piece of work with key stakeholders, both schools and parents, to develop that refreshed statements. A number of local authorities have been doing work in this area. We're looking at their good practice, and we'll use that to develop the work that we want to do in York. And there will be a stakeholder engagement event on the 25th of April here at West Officers, which will support that piece of work. In terms of the work that we want to do to continue to improve the quality of education, health and care plans, we have engaged support from CDC, the Council for Disabled Children. We felt that was really important because they actually supported us at the beginning of our work on our written statement of action, and they were crucial to us developing our SEND outcomes framework, which was co-produced with stakeholders and parents and carers. And they are going to support us on the 24th of April to do some work to develop the quality of our education, health and care plans by supporting us with an audit, a thematic audit, which will look at the quality of the specificity of outcomes inside those plans. And that will be, again, to develop the understanding across education, health and care of how to develop and write good outcomes in education, health and care plans. Outcomes which are specific, which are smart, which are measurable, and which will be easily understood by parents and carers and children and young people themselves. So that's a key piece of work that we are taking forward in that area. We were absolutely delighted to get the comments in our SEND revisit report that co-production is now a strength in York. We put a lot of effort into improving our work around co-production, and we were delighted that that came through as being seen by both Ofsted and CQC. It's a strong platform now on which to build and to take forward the work. It's not without its challenges, but it's really important that that now becomes the standard that we continue to meet. Ofsted and CQC could see the amount of work that we'd done and were particularly complimentary about the fact that we'd driven forward these improvements through the 2 years of COVID and the pandemic, and the fact that we'd written our written statements of action in a virtual world. We delivered it largely in a virtual world, and it is now giving us a strong platform on which to build our further improvements. One of the areas that we're working very closely on now is ensuring that our colleagues in social care are fully embedded within our SEND improvement journey. And I know it's an ambition both of Martin and Danielle that is taken forward at pace. And that's certainly something that we're welcoming as part of developing our local area SEND partnership. So really important that we've taken these steps. We are not complacent. We know there's much more work to do, but it was really important to get this endorsement that we'd taken the initial first steps in the right way. And we've now set a direction of travel, which we just want to accelerate and build on. We're also as well making real progress in that our substantive SEN services team will be in place by the end of March. So we've recruited to the head of service role, we've recruited to the SEN casework manager role, and to the professional support officer. All of them are joining us over the next few weeks. And that again gives us the capacity to continue with that improvement journey. I'll leave it there and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Maxine. Thank you. Just before I go on to questions, Councillor Waller, do you have anything you'd like to add to Maxine's report?
Thank you. I'd like to pay tribute to the work of staff in getting that result, and the partnership working with health was strongly demonstrated because they play a critical role, particularly in the assessments of the ECHPs. And from my experience with schools, that's a key concern from parents in getting the assistance for their children that they are hoping for. So I think that the key is that the 4 questions that were put, those have been answered, but with an understanding that that's the start point, that there is a journey to go on and there's a determination to ensure that there are the best outcomes for young people. And certainly the views from the schools forum was really about making sure that the most appropriate provision was being provided, and that parents understood the options that were available rather than seeing just the one way forward. So I think that it has taken a lot of effort to get to this point, but I think it's been an exercise that's really drawn people together, and I think there's a strong team to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Maxine, for bringing the report. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Waller said, that I think this has been fantastic work from you in particular and your team. One of the points that was made in the original report was a weakness in leadership. And Maxine, you've been the stalwart person that's held everything together when above you, both political and from the corporate side, things have kept changing. So thank you for the work that you've done over time. I do have a couple of questions, as I'm sure you'd expect I would. I won't let you get away with that. I suppose my first question is about the operational plan. You know, it's a SEND strategy for 2021 to 25. So we're 2 years into that. You know, what's the sort of rationale for this bit only coming 2 years in? You know, what's happened there? I'll pause there if that's okay.
Yeah, one of the things that we recognised was that we put the strategy in place, as I said, during COVID. And so what we focused on were the deliverables in that strategy against the written statement of action. But there are bits of that strategy now which we need to revisit and look at, given that we're in a different place. And it's really important that we draw together the local area partnership to say, what of that has now been delivered, and that, you know, basically we don't do any more on that. What do we now need to sharpen and refocus on? And that's really why we want to put in place that operational plan. What Ofsted and CQC could see was that as individual partners, we had operational plans. but that we didn't have an overarching document that brought all of that together. And that's what we want to do now, that it brings together very, very clearly what health are taking the lead on, what education services in the local authority are taking the lead on, and that contribution from local authority social care. We also want to use it as an opportunity to just sense check against the new Ofsted framework as well. So that operational plan is very crucially being developed in the recognition of the fact that Ofsted and CQC will be looking at us differently when they arrive again. So it's that opportunity to acknowledge that the framework's changed, that the ask is different, that the strategy was written before that change took place. Some things we will need to re-emphasise, and the operational plan is a good way of doing that before we have to rewrite the strategy.
Thank you. While I've got the floor, just ask me my second and my third question, and then I'm done. Thank you. So on the point about transition, I suppose my question really is sort of following on from what Councillor Waller was saying about work with the schools forum and supporting parents to see what options are available. Firstly, how are we supporting parents to make the right choices for their child? And where are the gaps? What actually at the moment isn't available?
Yeah, obviously one of the things that we do very, very carefully is explain the process of phase transfer to parents, because it is different to the normal admissions round and the milestones in it are different. One of the things that we know is that parents are quite wobbly, particularly about the phase transfer between primary and secondary. And what they see is secondary schools that are very big, and that they can't immediately see how their young person will thrive inside them, because they're aware of the fact that you go from having one teacher all day in the main and not moving too much around school to having to move an awful lot and see lots of different and new people. One of the things that we've done to help to increase the number of choices that people have got is obviously we are adding to our enhanced resource provision in secondary school from this autumn. So we will be opening a new ERP at Huntington, and we've been very clear about the profile of need that will meet. Because one of the things about ensuring that parents understand the provision is also being very clear about what each provision is designed to do. And that's one of the things that we've talked about with Schools Forum, about how we refresh that understanding across the system of what different provisions are designed for and which needs they best meet. We're also as well, obviously, refreshing everybody's understanding of the code of practice and what's meant by reasonable adjustments. Because if you go into that code of practice, it's very, very clear that there are some reasonable adjustments, that not all mainstream schools operate in quite the same way. And one of the things that we've talked to colleagues in Schools Forum about is establishing that consistency across schools in terms of the way that they make those reasonable adjustments, so that everybody is doing the same thing in the same way. And that will help parents as well, because some parents currently feel that there are certain schools that are more inclusive than others in the way that they implement those reasonable adjustments. And it's just ensuring that there is that consistency across the system, which is that discussion that we're now opening up with schools about how we can ensure that consistent response. In terms of where the gaps are, what we do know is that now the vast majority of requests for statutory assessment are for children with autism or with SEMH. And they now are the most dominant areas of primary need, not just in York, but nationally. And they make up over 40% now of the requests for statutory assessment. What we're looking at is a focus on need rather than diagnosis. And that's actually going to be really important to the next stage in our improvement journey. How are we putting in the right support at the right time, which helps education professionals to focus in on how do you meet the need. Now, some of that is being done through a change in the way that we're delivering specialist teaching. So we now have moved to what's called the Learning Support Hub. The way that we used to use our specialist teaching resource was that they would do a short-term input into a school. So they may visit a school, say, once a month. Now what they're doing is that they're receiving applications from schools to do a more concentrated piece of work. So they may be doing a piece of work which is consistent across a 6-week period with a school to build capacity by working consistently with that school across that period of time. And we're just getting back our first evaluations of the change in that support. And that's looking positive. The other thing that we're rolling out is the Autism Education Trust resources and training across the city. And that again is about building people's understanding and people's capacity. So there are lots of different ways in which we're doing this. The other thing, as I say, is we're looking at, with our school leaders, how alternative provision is being used and developed. And in particular, looking at the quality and sufficiency of that. And that review, that rapid review, will inform some recommendations around what we do around the use of SEMH capital. So we've got a number of different work streams now that are moving forward at pace.
Go on, I'll go on my third. I was going to be nice and let someone else say it. But next steps, paragraph 11 in the report, there's further work to do to improve the timeliness and quality of EHCPs. You've talked a little bit about improving the quality of them and the work, particularly around getting health involved. I think that's really key. In terms of timeliness, what sort of percentage are we at?
As of this month, we're actually at 64% in terms of completion in the 20-week timescale. I am being told by the plan writers and caseworkers that they will be at 100% timeliness by April.
That's a big step up, that.
It is.
They've
been closing a historic gap, basically. So they had a big bulge come in just before Christmas. And yeah, they're back on track in terms of clearing the decks on that now.
Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Chair. Just to repeat, I suppose, what we're hearing from others too, excellent work. So really well done, Maxine. Having worked with you over, I don't know, 10, 12 years now, and knowing how much you've put into this, that's absolutely fantastic. And I'm also pleased to hear you talk about, you know, developing the work on the social care side. And I know, obviously, Danielle will have an input into that, as Martin will do in overseeing that. So I think that's great now that we've got a team that are going to be working really in the best interests of young people in York, and a stable team really, which is absolutely great. As you know, my background is inclusion. I was inclusion advisor in another local authority, so I'm very pleased to hear that the transition process, that sort of thing, where parents can get anxious, that is being addressed, because it's a big step for them. Do you think, I suppose first question, do you think the inclusion model that we're trying to sort of operate under, do you think that's marrying? I know you described all of this. Do you think it's marrying quite well with the way forward for SEND as well?
Obviously, what we're trying to ensure is that we are using the provision that we've got in the right way. So some children, of course, will always need specialist education, and we're ensuring that everybody understands the best use of those special school places. So ensuring that those children who are best supported by our special school places at Hobmore Oaks and at Applefields, they get those places, and that children who can be appropriately supported with reasonable adaptation in mainstream those reasonable adaptations are in place and they're able to thrive in mainstream. So it's ensuring that we're using the right techniques in the right bits of the system is the key thing. One of the things, obviously, that we want to ensure is that as we're developing provision, that everybody starts to feel confident that there is the right type of provision for their child. Are we there yet? No. It will take probably a couple of years before we've actually really got there. And actually, nationally, nobody is there yet. We know that there is a problem around sufficiency in the system nationally. But I think what we've still got to hold on to in York is that our numbers are still relatively small in comparison to national. And although we are seeing greater complexity in certain young people, that also means that we should be able to shape our provision in a more targeted way to deal with those that are in the highest levels of need. And it is about really working very closely with our specialist providers and our mainstream to ensure that we're building that capacity right through the system. And what I do feel we've got at the moment a lot of goodwill around that. And it's important that we keep that goodwill moving forward, because as we've said, our partnership with health is really strong around SEND at the moment, to the point where they've invested an awful lot in developing their infrastructure around SEND. And I do feel that they've really stepped up in terms of understanding the importance of their contribution to SEN in the local area. So we've got some really strong things to build on. The challenge, as always in York, is resource. And that's one of the things that, again, we've got to ensure that the resources that we have are being used in a targeted way so that we are getting best value out of the use of those resources. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Thank you. One last one, if that's okay. I'm pleased to hear that we're looking at need rather than diagnosis, and you've alluded to that and described all of that. I mean, in the past, obviously, everybody would be clamouring for a diagnosis because through a statement in particular, and educational psychology would have been crucial in there, and educational psychologists that were like gold dust, really. And there was a little bit of controversy around the writing of statements, and some educational psychologists felt that they were being maybe suggested that they shouldn't be suggesting things that can't be provided. What is the role of educational psychology at the moment within the authority? How are you using them in terms of a resource that you mentioned?
Obviously, there is a statutory requirement to ask for the local authority to ask for EP advice as part of statutory assessment. What we've always wanted to do with our EP team is ensure that they've also got time to support the graduated response, which is around the way in which they work to build capacity in mainstream. And it's the area of work that they're most interested in as well. So, sort of how do they ensure that some key messages around SEN support, which is the biggest part of the SEN cohort, is actually being delivered in schools. They obviously that our SEN, our EP team, over time, we've been very fortunate to have a fully staffed EP team. We've just picked up a few maternity leaves at the moment, which is impacting on the team. But we're very fortunate in that what they provide is both preventative information as well as supporting the statutory assessment process. One of the things that we are asking them to do as well is use their professional judgments, because these are doctorate staff, to have a look at what their role is within the statutory assessment process. And if they feel that they've looked at the assessment that's come in from other professionals, and they use their professional judgment to say that there is nothing further that they could add to that process, then that's one of the things that we're using them to do as well. So we're thinking all the time about creative ways in which we can maximise the impacts of the use of our EPT. And they do add value in lots of different ways. They've done an awful lot of work around advocacy and children's voice, for example, over the past couple of years, and children's rights. They have done work around emotionally based school avoidance and produced materials for schools around that. They were obviously really crucial as well, providing helplines during COVID, which parents and professionals could access. And they continue to offer clinics and helplines as part of the work that they do. So really important as a resource.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maxine. I have Martin on mine. That's next.
Yeah, I think it's just really important to say, particularly around the issue of 2 years. Those 2 years have been taken over predominantly by a pandemic, and therefore people have been working from their home rather than office, and very, very difficult to do some partnership work. But actually, this is a partnership inspection. It's not just about the local authority. It's very much about schools, health, social care, and education all working together. And health, obviously, over those 2 years have had their heads turned to other activity as well. So it's actually quite a remarkable outcome in many ways, given all of those things have taken place together. And I guess it's also important to say that increasingly it's becoming an inspection of a broader partnership, which would include an inspection of the Department for Education, given that they're also responsible for academised schools. So any future inspection, to a degree, is also commenting on the Department for Education's ability to manage that part of the system. And I think I'll probably stop there, apart from just to say it's also a substantially underfunded national issue. We've seen a 50% increase, sorry, not 50% increase, we've seen a 33% increase of children in special schools over the last 5 years. So broadly, nationally, it's an increase of around about 45,000 children in specialist education. What's really important is that we also start to hear the child's voice when we're looking at external provision, particularly for those that may need to move out of the city. So I think we'll also be doing some work at working out how we get the child's voice very strongly about what do they want in terms of the provision that they see for themselves, as well as the parents' voice, which may be about an education that doesn't exist within the city of York. So lots of work to do, but I guess it's just to acknowledge that this is a broader inspection of many different organisations that have to come together and work hard together.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to say what everybody else has said about all the work that went into it. I did see some of it for a while, and I don't think we should underestimate, as Martin says, how difficult it was to do it in a COVID situation where everything was done remotely. We got health involved when they had massive issues to deal with themselves. So I think to get all that going together was a big achievement at that time. Others have said some of the things that I was going to say, but it's good that parents and children are now going to be involved in the process more than they were. They have been involved, but it's going to be more than it was in the past. I think that's very important. And finance, of course, as Martin says, there's not enough money in special education, not just here, but everywhere. Just a query, Maxine, about the young people, children and young people who go to mainstream schools. It's not always the case that they cope well all the time. Is there arrangements in there where they can be helped and possibly move to another situation if that's not working for them?
Yes, I mean, that does happen now, to be honest. So one of the things that is done, as you know, through the process of annual review of education, health and care plans is to ensure that we're always reviewing, is this provision appropriate for this child? And always that's considered in terms of what more adaptations need to be made for that child. We do have children who through the year will move setting because the setting that they're in is not actually meeting their need. So yeah, that's always happening. We also as well look at what additional support can be put in through things like top-up funding, through our specialist teachers, through what we know best practice exists in other areas. So, for example, a number of children with autism have been supported in our schools through the use of the AV robot. So they can sit in a room which is a better space for them and access in live time the lesson. So they'll still be in the school, but they'll be in a different part of the school. The robot will be in the lesson, and they can be included in that lesson through that. And that's something that a number of our schools have used and found has helped young people. It also helps young people where they've been off school for a while and are highly anxious. And the first step for them may well be just being able to go back through the school door. And it may be that they just need to sit in a room by themselves for a while and just get used to the experience of being back in school before they're actually able to fully access all the school has on offer. So one of the things that increasingly we're wanting to look at is how we can maximise the use of assistive technologies, such as things like reading pens, to help some young people to access things in the classroom where reading is an issue for them. And really starting to think about what in those new technologies will really help young people with SEND to be able to access things in the classroom, rather than just having teaching assistants.
Thank you, Maxine. I have a question. In what ways have we improved around the area of early identification of need? So to bring that as far forward as we can when we understand young people have a particular need.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work in the early years around the early identification of need. Obviously, one of the areas that we focused on is the early identification of speech, language and communication need through the screening that's taken place as a result of the implementation of Early Talk for York. So that training on the use of the Welcomes screening tool and then its application and its use has been one of the things that's been very important. We know that early years have been doing a lot more assessment of need because we're seeing more early years children coming through into the assessment panel. And that's one of the things that we know now, that practitioners within the early years are starting to ask that question and identified need earlier. So that's certainly something that we're seeing an increase in, is those requests for statutory assessment from the early years. And obviously one of the things then is getting that appropriate provision in place quickly, but then through the process of annual review, ensuring that that plan is working and helping that child to make progress.
Thank you, Maxine. Any other questions from around the members of the committee? Councillor Waller, do you have anything to add at this stage? Martin? In that case, Maxine, can I thank you very much for your report and for your helpful explanations of the questions this evening. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to move to item 5, the Ofsted update from Imagine Danielle. Good evening, Danielle. Welcome to the committee.
Thank
To
you.
introduce the key points you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, hopefully we've had opportunity to read the report, but I will give an overview.
The purpose of the report really was to update on the Ofsted action plan, but also in terms of children in care and on the workforce. We had our ILACS inspection back in March 2022. An Ofsted plan was developed and agreed back in June. A further update was provided to yourselves in October around the progress of that plan. The plan at the time was really addressing those immediate actions. We've now reached that point where we need to move on from that plan and look at embedding that further and going much wider in our improvement and development. So to achieve that, we have developed an ambition plan that is within the papers, and it sets out our 9 key priority areas, which really is around our workforce, the voice of our children, young people and their families, our early help, our multi-agency safeguarding hub, which is our front door, children and young people in care, practice, performance and quality insurance, leadership and our partnerships. So each of those priorities has a number of key improvement actions, and it sets how we will work to achieve them and how we'll know that we're succeeding. It is overseen by our Assurance and Ambition Board, which meets on a quarterly basis, and we're currently in the process of updating our plan against the actions and looking at the progress that we've made so we can present that next month. In terms of, if I move on to children in care, so we have 262 children and young people, along with 14 unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people who are also children in our care. So we've been working really hard across our cohort to ensure that every decision for a child to come into our care is at the highest level, and that it's the right decision, and we're giving the right level of scrutiny to that. We're also reviewing our young people at the 4-month point and the 10-month point to make sure that plans are moving through in a timely way that is right for children and their families. We have a number of groups. One of them is around how we make York home. We know we've had a number of our young people who have been placed outside of the city. So how do we work to ensure that we can bring them back into the city where that's appropriate to do so, and wherever that's possible. We do have residential provision in the city, 2 homes. They continue to be sat under adult services at the minute, but there are plans for them to move back to children's services. And we're very much looking at a model which sees residential care as a short-term solution for our children and young people. We know the impact of longer-term outcomes of residential care, and we believe that we should always be working to keep children in families wherever that's possible to do so. The vision is about children and young people being supported by a multidisciplinary team, very much a partnership vision. Both police and health partners are engaged in conversations, particularly around funding of roles within the service. That model will move at pace once we have a registered manager in place. At the time of writing this report, we were interviewed, but we have appointed to that, which is really, really positive. We have been part of the National Safeguarding Review for children and young people with disabilities and complex needs who live in residential settings and are in care. That was a request of all local authorities after the issues that were identified within the Hesley group. It really allowed us that opportunity to have a look at our children and young people. We found that they were living in settings that very much meet their individual needs and very much involved in their care planning. There were no recommendations from that review, and that review was reported back to the national panel. If I move on to our workforce, I think you will know about the issues around recruitment and retention of permanent social workers, and that does have an impact upon the children and families that we work with, particularly around the changes. We have found it difficult to recruit in York, as has every other local authority. However, we have been working in terms of our review of our agency workforce, and we have reduced that by 50%. So we've gone from 45 to 22 agency practitioners which we feel is great progress and brings a lot more stability to the service. Our senior management team is now permanent. We have 2 agency service managers in place, and one of those contracts will come to an end at the end of this week. Recruitment is underway, and we have a recruitment event planned. We are very much invested in the future workforce and participated in a number of learning programs, really looking at how we grow our own. We have established relationships with the University of York, with the teaching partnership, working closely with them to make sure that we provide good quality placements for social work students who will hopefully go on and work with us. We're a member of the Yorkshire and Humber Step Up Partnership, and we host 2 Step Up social work students. We're also part of the Frontline for the last 4 years, hosting Frontline students. We're partnered with the Open University, which has introduced the social work degree apprenticeship scheme, which is really positive. Since 2021, we've recruited 32 newly qualified social workers. All of them will join the Social Work Academy and be mentored and supported through their assessed and supported year in employment. So having a stable workforce is very much a priority for us. There continues to be the financial pressures in delivering within the budget. The improvement activity is beginning to ease, but that really is a modest reduction given how far we are into the financial year. But we are expected to save on an ongoing basis if we can continue that into 23-24. So I hope that gives an overview. Move on to questions.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I'm going to start by giving you a question, if I may. Members of this committee have often expressed concern about young people living outside the city who are in our care. When do you think it might be that we're able to have all the young people in care actually in their home city? Martha might want to join us on that one.
Sorry, can you just repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, when do you think it might be that we can have all our young people in care living in their home city?
So certainly it's our ambition that York does become home for every child. And I think we've started to make significant progress in not placing any child external to the city. I'm trying to think, and Danielle will correct me. I don't think since August we've had any placement placed outside York, which is fairly remarkable given previous history, really. We've also continuing to work really hard to bring some young people back. Danielle mentioned the children's home, which will be a partnership approach and will be something that's based on a national model called No Wrong Door. It is a multi-agency model. The police have already committed a police post to that service, as well as health have committed £100,000 to help deliver that home. So it's not just about us putting money which we've already got and we're already putting in, but actually we've brought partners to the table as well. Having a clinical psychologist working across children's homes and working with young people on the edge of care alongside a police officer and alongside speech and language makes a considerable difference to make sure that some of the more complex young people aren't going out of the city. We're also investing considerably in terms of trying to recruit foster carers for the city. That takes time. It takes on average about 6 to 8 months for a fostering assessment. But before that, we've got to make sure that we get the interest of foster carers coming in to York. So we're working. We've very recently started somebody in post that will focus solely on our advertising, our bringing people in to want to become a foster carer. And we're talking to all partners across health and other partners to help us advertise for foster carers. But that is going to take time. It isn't something. It's a bit like turning a very large ship in a very small river. It's not something that's going to be done overnight. But touch wood, at the moment we're making good progress on not continuing the history that was there.
Thanks, Martin. I'm glad to hear that progress is being made in the right direction. Councillor Ethan, I think, first, and then Councillor Webb.
Thank you. Just a very quick one, basically. When we're looking at recruitment, it's good to see we're bringing in so many newly qualified social workers. I think we've all been there, though, at different times in our careers when we've seen newly qualified people, we've been the newly qualified people coming into an organisation. It's helped if there's been more experienced people coming in as well. Where are we in terms of bringing in more experience into our organisation? And if we are having difficulties there, what are those difficulties that are being identified?
I think in terms of bringing experience in, we are doing that. We have got a leadership team now that is permanent. We're nearly there with our service manager level, who are very, very experienced. We're able to offer a grade 10, so an experience, there's a level of progression in there for social workers to keep with, for them to stay with us. I think what I would say to it is, in my conversations, and I meet regularly with practitioners, whether that's having a conversation about a child, family, or a young person, or I'm having a one-to-one with them. I had a one-to-one this morning with a social worker who said to me it's very much about the support that they get. It's a really, really difficult. We know that a tough job to do at times, very demanding, and it's about the support that they have. And she was able to talk to me very much about that today and how that felt, and was able to say that it felt different. So it's about how we support them to do their jobs well, and having that stability within the service will really, really help, which I think has been difficult over the last few years.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, I think following on from exactly that point, really. I mean, I just think that what I would say is this document that's here is a bit of a breath of fresh air, really. Martin said it's like turning a very big ship in a very small river. It's felt a little bit like that shipping container that got stuck in the Suez Canal for a while. We've not really gone very far. There's been a change of leadership, again, politically, there's a change of leadership corporately several times, and that hasn't helped things. And seeing that stability now coming through is really positive. And I think everyone should be really happy with that position we've got ourselves to. So thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for this document. I think this is the kind of thing that we've been asking for on this committee for quite a while now, and I think it's a big step forward. The question for me is, I've recently joined the Corporate Parenting Board, and the Corporate Parenting Board has changed somewhat recently. And one thing that came up was when colleagues from housing were talking about what their offer was for care experienced people in the city. And I'm not having a dig at housing here. This is just more sort of to illustrate a point that there seemed to be like a clear misunderstanding between the two sides, between housing and between those care experienced people, as to what could be expected and what would be really valuable. And also, how do we explain it to each other? And I was wondering, on priority 2, it talks about the voice of children, young people and families. How are we feeding that voice through to other services? That might be, for example, health and education, so a bit further away from the council, or it could be housing, economy, adult services, because obviously all of our care experienced people are moving into being adults. So how are we linking in with those services, and how are we being the champions with those children's voices and passing them on?
So I think that arenas like that, like Corporate Parenting Board, are really important to be able to share that information and pass it on. But working really closely day to day, we have a safeguarding partnership. Part of the, Martin and I will sit on the executive. It's about sharing that information and looking at how we do that together to really make a difference. And how do we really ensure that we're gaining the views of children, young people and families all of the time, and understanding that. So we've recently, for example, done our advanced practitioners have sat for a full week contacting families, asking them a number of questions around gaining feedback around what is, you know, the things that have worked well for them, the things that haven't worked well for them. And the themes quite quickly come through around what that is about. And it's about then how we feed it and make a difference. So I think we have previously done a lot of that and understood what it might mean, but then we've not been really clear about what we're going to do about it and how we're going to know that that's been successful and we've made a difference. So it's about slowing it down and really being able to think that through, but using those boards and avenues that we have to feed that through to partners, meeting with them regularly to have those conversations about how we can do it together as a partnership.
And then just following up, how are we then linking back to the children? How are we saying, right, this is what you told us, this is what we've said, and then it's that third bit, it's what feedback are we getting from the young people that things have changed, for example? How does that, what's the mechanism there?
So that very much is about how we look at how we do. You said we did really, and then the impact of that. So we need to revisit that as part of our quality assurance process. If we have a particular theme around an issue, that we're then looking at that, revisiting it and seeing what that looks like for children and young people. So whether that's about changed in social worker, for example, other issues that have come up, then revisiting that and making sure that we feel completely assured that we're working to address that and that we're continuing to strive to do better.
Thank you.
Councillor Fitzpatrick first and then Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Danielle. I think this is a really good report and it's good to see you presenting it. So that's great. Just a couple of things really, I suppose. Having been on the corporate parenting board previously, I would agree. And one of the things that came to light when I was on there were questions around housing. And I suppose it's managing expectations of young people realistically. But also, as Councillor Webb said, it's the other agencies within the council understanding the needs of young people too. So I also felt, leading on from that at that time, and I'm wondering where we are now, given that we have got elections coming up, I was slightly surprised at the lack of awareness of the young people of the fact that they can, maybe not at the moment, but in a few years' time, have the right to vote, you know, and to be involved in whichever party in the democratic process. And I think it's very important for young people in care to understand that and to recognise that they can actually shape the country, the society that they live in. So some sort of education around that might go on. And I'm thinking particularly if they might move around, you know, things like that, not being at one particular address or area or whatever, but just to know that they can influence change in the future. So that first question in a minute for you to answer it is that, maybe a comment on that. And, you know, secondly, I spoke to somebody recently who's very involved in the tourism industry in town, and I was trying to get him to take on board a volunteer programme of rewards for an organisation that I'm involved in. He said, absolutely, we would do that. We think that the one way to keep people involved or, you know, keen, is to reward them. And I'm thinking about retention of social workers, for example. And I mentioned social workers, and he said there is no reason why we couldn't adopt and work with the council in some sort of ways that, not in a patronising way, but I mean social workers who might have children, access to things around the city within that tourism type area. So I just think things like that, it would be nice, just little rewards that we can throw in there or try and incorporate. And I can put you in touch with the person concerned, maybe around that. I think it would be quite good. So that first bit then about, you know, making young people aware of the fact that they have got a voice in a wider sense in a year or two.
I think it's really important for young people to have a voice and shape what they think should happen and shape the future of our services. There are a number of groups, certainly under the Children's Champion, that can be accessed around enabling them to understand that through the virtual school. You know, how that can be made a fun thing to do in terms of understanding some of that and building on their education, as we should be doing with any other young person, even when they're not a child in care. In respect of your other point, it would be helpful to have that information. Certainly, we would want to develop anything like that as part of the city, as where we can support people and make it a place that people want to work, and it very much should be. Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Just to pick up on some of the points that have been raised in this discussion, in terms of voice of young people, they were certainly very much involved in looking at the action plan. And since then, in terms of the Show Me I Matter, Show Me I Still Matter, there's a lot of discussions going on there, and those groups have been re-energized in terms of seeing outcomes. And I think at the Corporate Parenting Board, to be able to say, well, we discussed that at the last meeting, and since then, this has been implemented, and the new posts in housing they have created within the estate management process, HMO, but I prefer estate manager, that there are dedicated posts for introductory tenancies. And I think that is as a consequence of some of the work that corporate parenting has done in terms of ensuring that there is a consistent person who would be helping someone coming out of care to their first home. It was helpful to see Alison from the apprenticeship team at the last event for young people, and that's very much building on the opportunities both within the council and signposting to other things that the young people may not have thought about, and having those discussions with someone that would happen in a family home, and therefore it's about replicating that. And I think that the work that's been done on the workforce, there was a very good day at the Friends Meeting House in Friargate in terms of bringing all the teams together so they could all see each other, and some national speakers that Martin ensured were there. And in the sense of giving confidence that York is a good place to come and work and to progress your career. And I think when looking nationally, there are councils facing even more difficult issues with recruitment. It shows that locally we're doing what we can, but I think in terms of listening to the young people and then acting on that, I think the evidence of that being a virtuous circle, there are more young people coming to events that are held in West Cafe, in terms of having those conversations, in having the discussions about, well, what would really help me, particularly with the local offer, is XYZ, and therefore you're able to, as a corporate parent, to actually have those conversations, which I think helps to inform policy. Thank you.
so Oral.
Thank you, Councillor. That explains a lot of things that couldn't happen because of COVID that are happening now, and the gaps that were left because of that. I think that's very encouraging. On the recruitment, I think it's quite significant or outstanding that you've reduced the number of agency workers there. I think that's because spending money on agencies always bugs me, whether it's here, health, educate, wherever, because the money's going to the agencies rather than the needs of our young people. In terms of recruitment, there was an arrangement being developed with other councils not to sort of recruit from each other. Is that working, or is that continuing?
Yeah, so that was predominantly around agency staff. So there was a memorandum of understanding that's been developed across the 15 regional authorities
Mhm.
to say that we would only pay a capped rate to agency staff. I think it worked for about 3 hours. In total, I think there was 1 or 2 authorities that just said we cannot afford to do this because actually we'll have so many social workers that leave. I guess to give you an example, there is a local authority not too far from us, and it's often around authorities that seem to be failing that have to rely on agency staff, and that authority has 176 agency social workers. So if they introduce that price cap immediately, they've got a workforce that would disappear. So it's something that regionally we're still struggling with. What I would say is nationally, as part of the National Care Review, the government issued their response to the National Care Review, I think it was last week. And alongside that is their response to what they're going to do about the social work agency market. And that includes creating a national capped rate, similar to what you see in teaching. So if you're a teacher, you go into a school as as a sort of an agency, a bank member of staff, and you're paid the same amount of money as the person that's next to you. So a number of things that will be introduced, but the time that will take is probably over around about a 2-year period, which isn't enough pace. And certainly the National Association for Directors of Children's Services have fed back to government and will continue to feed back to government that needs more pace, it needs to be driven at speed. Like you, I completely share your view about the misuse of agency. Is not something that we're keen to use at all, and we've made considerable progress. We're obsessed on making sure that goes down to 0 as soon as we possibly can. It is in a very, very tight market, a very challenging market. In terms of recruiting from other local authorities generally, we don't go poaching staff. We will absolutely encourage anybody that wants to join York. It's a fantastic city to work for, particularly in social work.
And is that reciprocal?
We don't want people to leave York, so we would encourage them to stay. And again, there's more that we will do in terms of when somebody does suggest that they want to leave. We want to do a lot of work to understand why they want to leave, and at times do a lot of work with them to make sure that they stay with us. But that's about also having opportunities that, in terms of promotion and having a career path. So lots of work being done to make sure that we keep and attract good people.
Thank you.
Martin's very helpful. Kind of fits that Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, just a comment really, I suppose. I've said previously that I sit on the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and that is always a key thing about memorandum of understanding, and they laugh at each other amongst themselves. And it was a question to Tracy Brabin recently as Mayor about that. And it was specifically around social workers, really, and the fact that they are poached. So I suppose I'm going to ask Martin and Danielle, as you come from somewhere very close to home, and we've got devolution coming up, we're not going to see anybody going across county, I would hope. I'm just joking about that, really, but I mean, you're well positioned within that devolution argument moving forward to know the market elsewhere. So again, we're lucky to have you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Danielle? Thank you, Danielle. Thank you very much for your detailed report, and thank you for the progress you're clearly making in your department. Right, in that case, then we'll move on to the work plan. And this, of course, is our last committee meeting of this municipal year, as we all know, on the 7th of March. Any comments on that from committee members? You'll notice that we've got a speaker, hopefully from the York Citizen Theatre Trust, coming to talk about the annual review, which Tom Bird wasn't able to make last time. Okay. Thank you all. I don't have any urgent business, so Councillor Fitzpatrick?
I just want to say, I haven't actually said it to my colleagues here yet, but I won't be at the next meeting, I'm afraid, so I'll arrange for a substitute if I can.
Right,
I just
thank you
want
very
to
much.
say that good luck to everyone moving forward. I'll be standing down at the election, so it will be my last meeting in this forum. And I'm really pleased to be leaving on a quite positive note. We're moving in the right direction. So, you know, well done to all concerned.
Thank you very much. Thank you. In that case, shall I close the meeting at we'll go at 27. Thank you very much. Thank you all.